My understanding as a child growing up was keep the hag away, keep the hat away, evil spirits away.
Charleston is known as the Holy City, and one reason for that is the multitude of churches on our peninsula. We're at this graveyard of St. Philip's Episcopal on Church Street. It actually is the oldest congregation south of Jamestown, Virginia, dating all the way back to 1680. Behind me are a variety of different famous Charlestonians, including John C. Calhoun, poet, author DuBose Hayward, and a couple of signers of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. The graveyard behind me is known as the stranger side of the graveyard, and it's separated solely by the fact that they needed access to the city market back in 1800. People often ask why Charleston is one of America's most haunted cities. Not only has it had a very tragic and bitter past, war and natural disasters and such, but we save our buildings here. A lot of the buildings in this town look the same on the inside and the outside, and I've personally always thought the spirit world finds comfort in that. It looks the same as it did back in the day. My name is Ed Macy, and for the next hour we'll be talking about real ghost stories. The things you might hear about might sound like superstitions, or they might sound like dreams, but to the people that experienced them, they're as real as concrete. I've written several books on the subject of ghosts in Charleston's Low Country, and these are some of the stories. The first white orphanage in America sat on the corner of St. Philip's and Calhoun Street. It was almost a city block of a building built in 1790, and it was destroyed in the 1950s to make way for a Sears department store. On the site currently sits the Berry Dorm. Hundreds of people, mainly students living inside this dorm, have experienced two different things that happen in the wee hours of morning: fire alarms going off and disembodied voices. In fact, one young lady I interviewed said the voices sounded like little kids, little female kids playing Ring Around the Rosie somewhere off in the distance. Vague, muffled, but obviously a large group of little girls at play. The sounds come from the air conditioning vents, from the elevator shaft, and literally from inside the walls of the Berry Dorm. Also, the fire alarms in the building will go off with great frequency in the middle of the night, usually between 12 a.m. and 5 a.m. When I was attending the College of Charleston in the early 1990s, one of my friends, Toby Thompson, lived in the Berry Dorm before it became an all-girls dorm. Toby and several of my other friends that lived there talked about the voices they would hear, but back in those younger days, I didn't care. I wasn't interested in ghosts. But as I reflect now about what I know, I'm certain that they heard the voices of those little orphans who were burned up in a fire 90 years ago from the filming of this documentary. One of my friends that lived in the Berry Dorm when it was brand new in 1991 actually would hear on a nightly basis the sound of marbles being dropped on the floor above him. It happened almost with great frequency, a small bag filled with marbles being dumped on the floor right above his head. He tried to go up there and he found out that for 6 of the months he lived up there, that actual dormitory room was vacant. The marbles were coming from an unknown source.
Well, the first time I heard the marbles rolling across the ceiling was probably a couple weeks into school starting. I was just laying in bed and I heard the marbles rolling across the ceiling. It sounded so just like precise, just so clear that it was just somebody above us, like just dropping something on the floor. But then it was the same time, like kind of each night, and the same kind of sounds, and it just did not sound like anything else but marbles. Those who question it, I'd say spend one night in there and you'll completely change your mind and really, really believe that there is something really creepy going on in there.
I interviewed one young lady who lived in the Berry Dorm 3 years ago. She and her friends, who were, according to her, very clean and neat, would oftentimes wander into the bathroom and find that the mirror was smudged up with a burn mark. But every time this funk would appear on the glass, the name Emily was drawn into it in an old-fashioned cursive. I've always tried to find out if one of the little unidentified girls was an Emily.
It is my understanding that Berry Dorm is haunted because of what happened with the orphanage beforehand, with the fire, and then the orphans not being able to get out in time. There was only like a certain amount of people on duty that night that were able to get a certain amount of orphans out of there, and they're still there. That's the story, and that's what lives on today, is that they're still running around there, and we hear them, so they're still there.
The paranormal events that occur in the Mullinax trailer in Orangeburg, South Carolina are unique, very peculiar, and quite scary. I met a young couple, Jason Mullinax and his wife, a couple years ago, and they told me about a ghost in their trailer in Orangeburg, South Carolina. And it involved bizarre phone messages being left on their answering machine. It involved them waking up in the middle of the night with nickels in both of their hands. Nickels being found in ashtrays and in coffee mugs all over their home.
Well, the first time a nickel fell in the house was the night before Halloween 2004. I think that night 5 fell within about a 30-minute period or so. I'd say we probably got more than 200 nickels from the night before Halloween of 2004 up until now. And we have heard things in the house and thought we saw stuff and really couldn't explain it. But we had heard a loud noise at the back of the house, and we had gotten up out of the bed and went back to see what it was. Well, we didn't find anything. As we were coming back through the house, just as a joke, I kind of reached out and grabbed Dee Dee in the small of her back, you know, to try to scare her. And as soon as I did that, a nickel hit the floor right beside us.
The Mullinaxes not only have heard roaring horses through their den, but they've also heard bizarre chipped messages on their phones. They've heard voices that seem to be pleading for help coming out of their cell phones.
Hello, you have reached the AT&T voicemail service. Dee Dee, 2 saved messages are in your mailbox. First, saved message, Friday, 10:06 p.m.
In one instance, there was even technological validation for these sounds and voices over the phones. The word Southern Bell came across on the text screen of the cell phone, a company that has not existed for almost 20 years. So not only is it rooted in perhaps the Civil War or even further back, but it goes at least to the 1980s, when Southern Bell was a pliable and very big company in the Southeast.
We came home, ate dinner, the phone rang, Southern Bell, got a message. Then we heard, while we were laying in the bed, this was, an hour later, the only way I can describe it is it sounded like a huge wing flapped, like the air. And as soon as we heard it, we sat up and the phone rang at the exact same time it was Southern Bell again.
Was the wing on the phone, or was that something you could hear outside?
No, that was...
It sounded like towards the front door area, like in the living room. So the phone rang, we answered, got a second message or whatever. That's when we heard the clawing in here. He grabbed a gun. I called my mom because we were going to go stay at my parents' house that night. That was beyond what I'm willing to deal with at that point. So I called my mother, and I'm talking to her. We'd had 2 messages left on the phone. And as I was talking to my mom, I said, well, I'll 3-way and let you listen to those messages. And it said, you're unable to access your voicemail at this time. It's currently being used.
Meaning somebody else was checking it?
Meaning something else was leaving a message. And when I got off the phone with my mom, there was a total of 5 Southern Bell calls.
Woke up one morning, put my boots on. I was working in Charleston at the time. Left out about 4 in the morning or so. Stopped at the store up here to get gas. As soon as I stepped my left foot out of the truck, I felt something in the bottom of my shoe. Took my boot off, and it was a nickel in my shoe.
We've heard a couple of different voices and seen some things, but in the beginning, your mind tries to rationalize, that was, the fan blew that, or, I'm just seeing things, or, you try to make sense of it. And it's almost like the more scared you get, the worse it is.
Exactly like that.
And it seems like they would fall one right after the other. Almost like children, getting their kicks out of scaring us, because now it doesn't really scare us so much as
when they fall, I just go find it and pick it up.
We're trying to figure out why.
One of the most obvious explanations is a burial ground. Jason Mullinax actually plotted where he had found Nickles, and when the thing was laid out, it looked exactly like a graveyard. He has not gone in and dug into the turf to find out if ancient corpses reside underneath his home, but it's very possible.
Actually, I had made some dowsing rods out of a couple pieces of tungsten wire, and I'd heard that not only is it good to pick up groundwater, but you can pick up caskets with dowsing rods because they fill up with groundwater. And I would just make a mark on the ground with my foot every time they would cross. And as I got to the light pole, I turned around, I was gonna come back and check myself. Well, when I came back, I looked down in the mark that I made with my foot, and every mark that I made, there was a nickel laying in it.
He has not gone in and dug into the turf to find out if ancient corpses reside underneath his home, but it's very possible. It's very possible that that's the place where people were laid to rest, and that's the reason this portal of darkness has opened up inside their home.
Do you believe in ghosts, girls?
I do.
I don't believe in ghosts. I believe in angels.
I do believe in ghosts. I do.
Many years ago in England, I was lucky enough to have a very close relationship with somebody who could talk to ghosts, and I had proof, absolute proof. Too long to cover in this thing, but definitely believe in ghosts.
I absolutely do, 100%.
So tell us what makes you believe in ghosts.
Well, I just am a spiritual being that thinks that there's a level of energy out there that is not human, and I feel it.
Charleston was founded in 1670 as a business venture by the British. Turmoil has followed. There have been wars, disasters. There have also been a lot of ghost stories here as well. We're here in Philadelphia Alley, just south of the city market. Philadelphia Alley, back in the olden times, was populated by very poor African American families that have since become our gullah culture.
Oh my Lord, sing it to the world, follow the light, fight the good fight.
It's a tradition that involves not only food and language, but also some deep, dark superstitions, some of which we'll explore tonight. Right now we're in the middle of Charleston's French Quarter, which was the epicenter of the sale of slaves back in the golden days of the antebellum period. Slaves were sold here in the French Quarter to keep it out of the public eye. Most people regard Gullah as being a language, and it is. It was a speak that came about in the days of slavery so that some slaves that spoke the same tongue couldn't communicate on the plantations. But even though they talked a different language, they came together. They came up with a patois that is now the language known as Gullah. But it is also superstitions that are rich here in the Low Country's fabric.
Everybody like to know about that blue piazza painting. The piazza we call on the porch, and maybe around the windows and the ceiling. My understanding as a child growing up, it would keep the hag away, keep the hat away, evil spirits away. And so the old people must have brought that from our motherland, from Africa. A lot of these traditions were brought with our ancestors, you see. We didn't just create them ourselves. They came with the tradition just like the sweetgrass came. And so hags and hants were really real. A hag is something, Charlie, jump on you and you can't get him off. Yeah, hag spirit is like it'll jump on you, unbeknown, it'll leave you stiff, and you can't move till the hag moves.
Although the concept of Haint Blue might sound like crazy mumbo jumbo, an author named Wade Davis from Harvard wrote a book called The Serpent and the Rainbow. The point of his book, to find out how witch doctors enslave people using the bladder of a blowfish. There's a toxin in there that they would use on suckers in the market. They'd inject it, the victim would fall into such a deep coma that it mimicked death. And then the witch doctor would dig them up later on after the funeral and infuse smaller tinctures of the same poison. So the concept of zombies is not far-fetched if you've seen the dead rise from the earth. The ancestors of the Gullah people what we would today call a witch doctor, would oftentimes use pieces of Mother Nature to create cures, tonics, elixirs, and even poisons. They were masters of knowing how to derive things from the earth, be it from an animal or be it from the root of a tree.
Well, you know, the old people believed in, winter time you could go out in the fields and get what we call night of everlasting, break a cold. You know, you have a bad cold and fever, they boil that tea and give you that tea. And it would, overnight, you would really sweat it out. And that was one remedy. Of course, you know, we had some old sayings. If you believe something gonna hurt you or harm you, we throw the salt around the door.
Many of the totems used in the Gullah culture, be it blue paint, be it a blue bottle, or even a barrier of salt at a doorway, creates a boundary that the spirit world cannot enter. For instance, the blue is a symbolic water. Evil in West African culture cannot cross a body of water. So all these things are protectants for the occupants of the home, keeping them safe from haints, hags, and various other unidentifiable entities in the Gullah culture.
I know I have seen older people in my days coming up, racing out their track, racing the track out, walk and backtrack, race that track. We take all day to race your track out now, so that nothing evil can follow you in your tracks.
One time, me and my family were out, and we were out on a boat in Galveston. This is an old battle cruiser, had been out to war, been sunk, and they redid it and brought it back. And we went on a tour of this boat, and we had this nice young sailor, you know, as we were going along, tour us all around the boat and everything.
I think all of us probably believe a little bit in ghosts if we've had some kind of encounter we can't explain.
And when we got done with it, I mean, he was taking us to places where we weren't supposed to go, and when we got done with it, we went up to the front desk and like, oh, the tour guy was really nice, you know, he's a really nice young man. And they kind of looked at us weird, and they were like, we don't have any tour guides on this boat. We don't have anybody showing us around. And so we kind of believed that he was a guy that maybe passed away on the boat and was just showing us around. So that's my... Yes, he seemed normal. I was younger at the time, but I still remember it pretty well.
But I think it comes down to being two kinds of people. Either you do or you don't, and it's kind of an internal type of a thing. And I've had enough experiences in my life where you know, the hairs stand up on the back of your neck, and where your sense is that something is there and that something is really happening. So it just comes down to those personal experiences for me.
Because I'm quite familiar with the gray man, and I did on occasion. And this was in, I was probably in high school, and I was at Pawleys Island. And I was reading the book, The Gray Man's Story. And then we decided to go out for a walk on the beach. And it was because I was so primed from reading this story. I really thought I did see the gray man that night.
Really?
And it scared the shit out of me, yeah.
In the wee morning hours of September the 21st, 1989, Hurricane Hugo rolled into Charleston and put a wall of water up over the high wall at the Battery. Most of the homes here along East Battery and East Bay Street were flooded. Their front doors were blown in by the tidal surge. It didn't stick around long, but once the salt water and the mud touched the valuables, they were ruined forever. But the damage was nothing compared to what happened up in the Grand Strand, near Pawleys Island, home of the South's most famous ghost, the Gray Man. The last time this entity was seen was September the 19th of 1989 by a young couple on Pawleys Island, South Carolina. It's 61 miles north of Charleston. It was dusk. They were walking on the beach holding hands when they saw it in the knee-deep waves, a gray shadow walking. And they immediately knew his warning. Anybody who's even rented on Pawleys Island for a week knows the Gray Man's warning. It's, you see me, you get out of Dodge fast because a big one's coming. They did. As irrational as this may sound, they got in their car that day and drove to Kentucky. Turned out to be a wise move because Hurricane Hugo hit on the 21st and obliterated Pawleys Island.
For 2 days. I haven't slept for 2 days. I've been here on the island.
Here's the eye of the hurricane right here.
Folks waited anxiously by the radio for any bit of information they could get on Hurricane Hugo.
Bad storm.
that will experience hurricane-force winds, which will be between 75 and 110.
This video was shot Saturday, September 23rd, a day and a half after Hugo. Photographer Florian Pizzle and I were among the very first news crews to get back on the island. We found many streets blocked by trees and homes, other streets impassable because of gaping holes. And there was an element of danger, particularly from escaping propane gas. That danger is one of the reasons given for not allowing residents back on the island right away. On Front Beach, the Windjammer had a front wall remaining, but little else. The boardwalk is gone. Much of that building blew across the street into the new pavilion shops. The fishing pier in front of the Sea Cabin condos is also gone with the wind. It had been rebuilt a few years ago after Hurricane David wiped it out. The damage is both massive, like you see back here, but yet spotty. You'll go along and maybe the next two structures will look relatively unscathed.
There are a number of different types of ghosts out there. One, the lost soul, someone who dies, not in heaven, is not on earth, but lingers maybe in what Catholicism calls purgatory. But there's another type of ghost out there that someone of faith would call an angel. They die, they go to the light, then they come back because they love something or someone. That's what the gray man is. Sometimes years will go by, but the hurricane will not affect the home that these people live in. He's a gray man. He walks along the shoreline and among the homes that grace the shore of Pawleys Island. Hundreds have seen him, but one man actually saw him and had several homes blessed and protected by this entity.
We were blessed with a beautiful home. It's still intact on the north end of Pawleys Island, and it's on a creek. And a very large house. It sleeps probably 36 people, and porch all the way around it, roof on the top. And we always, as kids, had to sleep in the attic, and slept in these little metal cot beds. And when you slept in the bed, you could look out the window, and you looked out the window, and you'd see the roof to the porch. It, of course, was all the way around the house. But I'm guessing it was when I was about 12 years old, which would have been around 1958. I woke up one night, and just as clear as could be, it's just like something woke me up. And I looked out the window, and there was a silhouette on the porch, and it was this man with this, like a bowl on top of his head, and with the wind blowing, and his clothing doing like this. And, I was scared to death, and I froze, and I closed my eyes, and I woke up, opened my eyes again, and he was still there, and I did that several times. And I could remember as I just said, I'm not dreaming, I'm awake and awake.
Since Joe Nuttall saw the gray man in 1958, every piece of property he's been associated with on the beach has been protected from hurricanes. The gray man is indeed Joe Nuttall's guardian angel. He is blessed to have seen this entity.
Finally, it was gone. Whatever, that image was gone, and I proceeded to forget about it. I wanted to forget about it, and I wanted it to be like a dream. And really interesting in it, there was a family that were friends of my mother's family, the Bullocks, and they lived in Clinton, South Carolina, and I had no idea this was the infamous J.S. Julian S. Bullock, who was an expert on the gray man. Anyway, he had a daughter, Dixie, and I had a date with her. I come to the house, and Mrs. Bullock welcomes us and everything. Have a seat in the parlor. And I went and sat down in the parlor, and there was this book, this little book, and it said, The Return of the Gray Man. And I opened it up, and I flipped through the pages just looking at it, and bam, there was my image that I had suppressed for all these years in that book. And I was just totally, I was just totally blown away, and it was like, I froze, and so she came down, and it was like, what's wrong? And I said, I gotta talk to your dad or whatever. Mr. Bullock came in, and he just comes in, puts his arm around me, and he says, son, he says, you're one of the few, but there's a good number of people that have been blessed with seeing the gray man.
It is the scenario that we talked about so many times, and then afterwards say, well, remember when Hugo came ashore?
ghost story?
Yes. My friend Chambers in middle school, I used to carpool with her, and in the mornings my mom would drop me off. And she lived in like an old slave house, you know, aside from the plantation house in Hollywood. And the TV would cut on for no reason. The pots and pans would just fall off the rack over the stove. Scary stuff to a 10-year-old kid.
Someone opened the door of my bedroom, physically opened it. I woke up, I spoke to the person, the door closed, and then we searched the whole house for this person, was not there. So.
I think I do now, yes. Just the stories about the real people and the history, it just kind of, it makes it more believable. And I'm going to go upstairs and see if I can find the one on my floor. Well, apparently there's a shoe salesman that died here years and years ago, and he hangs out on the 11th floor, so that's right.
This is the Francis Marion Hotel. This Art Deco masterpiece was built a few years before the Great Depression. And by the way, it's haunted. I'm here to tell you about the ghost on the 10th floor. In the middle of the Great Depression, a young Charleston woman went up to Manhattan, New York. There she met a traveling shoe salesman by the name of Ned Cohen. Ned was immediately smitten by this woman. In 1936, when the opportunity arose for him to visit Charleston to sell shoes for Florsheim, he leaped at the opportunity. Not to sell the shoes, but to track down this Southern belle. Ned came here and checked into the Francis Marion Hotel in the middle of 1936. After a grueling day of beating the streets trying to sell his wares in the King Street shopping district, he returned to his room one late afternoon. Found a note slid under his door. It was a Dear John letter. He read it, his heart broke, he took a shot of whiskey, and he did the unthinkable. He took the final leap of his life. He jumped out of the 10th floor window. His body hit the street. He was barely recognizable. They put him in the city's morgue, and they were only able to identify him a couple of weeks later when they found a letter in his coat pocket. It was a letter from a young woman, a Dear John letter. Ned had been dumped, and it's firmly believed that his suicide leap was done because his heart was broken by this unnamed Southern woman. As it turns out, even though Ned died that day in 1936, according to both guests and staff at the Francis Marion Hotel, he's back.
I stayed at the Francis Marion Hotel for my college orientation at the College of Charleston. When I went upstairs to go get something out of the room, I saw a man as soon as the elevator doors opened. He was about 5'6". He had a collared shirt on with a tie and loose baggy pants. I saw him walk down the hallway, and as soon as I stepped off the elevator, I immediately felt a temperature drop of about 30 degrees. I watched him go down the hallway and vanish right through the wall. I immediately went back into the elevator and went downstairs, told my parents and requested that the hotel change our room.
I worked in the hotel in, 10 years ago, so 1998, 1999 time frame. I actually talked with the family on their way out after seeing the ghost. They walked out like stuff bundled in their arms. Like, get the car now, we are ready to go. Trying to be nice to them and inquire, if everything was okay, if we could fix anything. That's when they told me the story of what they saw, and that was actually the same day they checked in. So check in on one day, check out by that evening, early evening, somewhere around 5, 6 o'clock, with all of your stuff in your arms.
When I first saw it, I didn't exactly know what I was seeing, but then as soon as I felt that temperature drop, I just was immediately just paralyzed with fear.
The family was coming up to the, I believe, 10th floor. They got off the elevator, and one of the first things they noticed was as they're walking down the hallway, You know, it was really cold compared to, to what they were just inside of. It didn't make sense. I mean, it was a dramatic chill. And they noticed a guy dressed in a dark suit, maybe from like the 30s era, walk basically out of the wall, kind of look at them, and just start like he's gonna just, go running down the end of the hallway. These folks just turn around and immediately go back into the elevator. And when I asked them, were you sure that it wasn't, a person, maybe they just walked out of a room or something that freaked you out? And the lady said that they knew that it wasn't a human because he looked transparent, like you could see through him.
When I told the people at the hotel what I had seen, they were very nice. They went up to the room with my parents because I wouldn't go back up there. And they got our stuff out of the room and they switched rooms for us.
The interaction that I have with other employees here at the hotel, especially when we're talking about the ghost, is fairly interesting because everybody seems to have either that perfect ghost story or a lot of folks just have never seen him and they've been here for a while. So it's real interesting. People say, they just get that creepy vibe, or I've heard other folks talk about they got that cold feel. You get the few people who swear up and down that they saw him.
For the last 73 years, 118 people have seen Ned Cohen's spirit on the 10th floor of the Francis Marion Hotel.
We were staying on the 10th floor. It was definitely an experience that I don't really want to relive again.
Not everybody could be wrong, and these aren't, a bunch of lunatics. These are normal people, so.
People come to Charleston for many reasons: the history, the architecture, and the weather. If you come to Charleston and happen to stay in the Francis Marion Hotel, you may see one of the most unique sights of them all. A man from the 1930s walking down a hallway, looking exactly as he did the day he died in 1936. There's a piece of property on the campus of the College of Charleston that was bought back in the mid-1960s cheap. And since it was renovated, families have seen a young man, mid-30s, walk out of the wall, stand over them at the foot of the bed and attempt to talk. His lips move, his hands gesture, but no words come out. It's almost like an immediate silent movie. After 8 seconds of this vain attempt to speak, he notices he's not getting his point across, so he turns in disgust or frustration and exits back through the wall, the same way he entered. Now, 8 people have seen this ghost, 4 couples from 1968 until 1994. By the mid-1960s, the College of Charleston had started to grow extremely fast, and the school started buying up as much property as possible. They bought the property at number 12 Glebe Street in 1966 for $16,700. The place was bought sight unseen because every window and door was covered in plywood. Once the school bought it, without an inspection, they sent a crew of engineers inside to see if it even had a floor. And the first thing these gentlemen did when they walked inside was gag. It seems an old woman had been living there for 40 years prior to 1966. In the front room of the house, she had a camping toilet with a plastic bag in it, thus the gagging, a sleeper sofa, a tiny black and white television, and a hot plate. The rest of the building closed up like a mausoleum. There was even a staircase wall preventing anybody from going up to the 3rd floor for decades. In August of 1968, the Steinbergs were in bed reading at 9 p.m. The lights were on but dim when a 6'1" male walked out of the wall and stood over them at the foot of their bed. Short hair, mid-30s, fairly well dressed. He looked him in the eye, but the thing they said they'll never forget, his vain attempts to speak. All 8 people who saw this ghost at the foot of the bed in that front bedroom of 12 Glebe Street said that not only did he make eye contact, but he tried to talk. His lips moved, his hands gestured, but no words came out. I've done a lot of research on this piece of property, and I've never been able to find out who he is, why he's there. But it's still one of my favorite ghost stories because it proves to people like me who believe in this kind of stuff that maybe there's cognizance from the other side. I honestly don't think ghosts have the capacity to harm the living, but I certainly wouldn't want to disrespect someone from the other side if they were indeed listening. Many people call Charleston one of the most haunted places in America. Who knows? There's no meters to detect spectral activity or some kind of a ghost census. But these are some of the best and finest stories we have. They're also some of the most mysterious. These are real ghost stories you've heard tonight. They're not legends, they're not make-believe, They happen to real people, and they've been witnessed by real people who have more to lose than to gain by telling their stories. Because of the architecture and because the buildings have remained the same, in some cases both inside and out, we've been able to bring you these stories tonight. Hope you've enjoyed these stories about Charleston, Haunted Charleston.
Evil spirits away.
I haven't slept for 2 days.